Hi guys. So Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson clashed in Parliament today over test and trace and issues connected with that. Of course, Boris Johnson used this opportunity to broadcast, to boast, and it was quite disgusting. So let's hear what both of them had to say.
Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, hundreds of families are trying to get a test in the last week and they can't get one. I do acknowledge the number of tests overall, but this is basic stuff. People who've got COVID symptoms are very anxious about themselves, their children, their families, and what to do. It means they can't go to work, they can't send their children to school. It matters. And if they can't get tests, the Prime Minister needs to take responsibility. And not just about the future or something else, but address this problem. And I want to take it further because it's not just that people are being told to go hundreds of miles. Somebody contacted me yesterday and said this: my wife has a temperature and they said we needed to isolate and get a test done. I've been trying to book a test. This is yesterday, Prime Minister. And the site says no capacity. Then I tried for a home test kit and they're telling me that there are no kits available at present. This is the state today, yesterday. Yesterday there were no tests available in London, the same the day before. Prime Minister, what is happening?
So Keir Starmer is very clever because he uses real world scenarios to attack Boris Johnson with. He connects with ordinary people. He says these are the problems ordinary people are facing. People have to travel hundreds of miles in order to get a test. What are you doing about it?
Mr. Speaker, I note that he won't take back his criticism and his attack on NHS test and trace. I know that.
Now, what Boris Johnson always does is he responds by, he doesn't answer questions, he responds to the question. So first what he does is he insults the questioner. Then what he does is he ignores the question and turns it into some type of speech about how great the government is, how great the people the government have hired to do specific jobs are, even if they're failing, but how great they are. And then what he does is he asks for unity. So he first insults the questioner, ignores the question, twists it into something he wants to talk about, and then he invites the original questioner, who he insulted, to join the government.
I regret that. I gave him the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to withdraw his verdict that it was on the verge of collapse. It is not. They're doing a heroic job.
He said, so Keir Starmer had said that the test and trace is on the verge of collapse. Well, if people are going to the website and saying that there is no capacity available, this is what's happening. People are going to the website, they're asking for a test, and it says there's no capacity available. So if this is what's happening, then it's not working. If you're inviting people to take a test, they go to the website and says there's no capacity available, and they're ending up having to travel hundreds of miles, then there's a problem. It's not functioning.
They're testing hundreds of thousands of people. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we will...
Boris Johnson slipped up here. He said they're testing hundreds of thousands of people. No, they're doing hundreds of thousands of tests. There is a difference. He sort of slipped up here. He should have said hundreds of thousands of tests.
Do more. And the world we want to move to as fast as possible is a world in which everybody can take enabling tests at the beginning of the day.
So once again, Boris Johnson doesn't talk about what they're doing now. It's talking about the future. Yes, in the future we will have immediate tests. We'll have tests that turn around in an hour. Matt Hancock back in May, I think it was, or in April even, was saying how, yes, we will have this test and trace system running in a couple of weeks. In July, it wasn't working, and they had to go and ask Google and Apple to develop a test and trace, a tracing app. It's all about what we'll have in the future, not actually what they have now.
An antigen test to identify whether or not we have the virus or not, like a pregnancy test, within 15 minutes or so that we know whether we're able to live our lives as normally as possible. That's the vision that the Health Secretary and others have been sketching out over the last few days. That's where we intend to get to. In the meantime, NHS Test and Trace is doing a heroic job, and today...
It's actually not NHS Test and Trace. Boris Johnson keeps doing this, and I wish someone in Parliament would hold him to account over this. Even the House Speaker should be holding him to account over this. It's not NHS Test and Trace. It's a private company that, I don't know, have they given money to the Conservative Party in order to win this contract? I don't know. But it's not the NHS. It's a private company. Now, Boris Johnson is using the name NHS to lend credibility to this. But it's not the NHS. Because we know that the NHS, and he knows, and politicians in general know, that the NHS has a high level of credibility in the country. So attaching anything to the NHS gives the impression that it's of high credibility too. In the same way that Dominic Cummings back in 2016 was using vote leave propaganda, printing it, sticking the NHS style logo on it in an attempt to lend the credibility of the NHS onto vote leave, and leaving them in hospitals. So the people who were waiting would pick them up thinking it's from the NHS, saying, we need to leave the European Union. So Boris Johnson is doing exactly the same thing. This was probably advised to him by someone like Dominic Cummings, or maybe Dominic Cummings himself. People trust the NHS, attach the name NHS to anything, and people will think it's trustworthy as well.
I can tell him that most people get an in-person test result within 24 hours, and the median journey is actually under 10 miles if you have to take a journey to get one.
Why are you so arrogant about this? People are having to travel. You should say, I'm sorry that some people have... show some empathy. I'm sorry that some people have had to travel hundreds of miles. We're looking into why that's the case. We're trying to fix it. In most cases, people don't have to do that. But in those isolated cases, we're going to try and fix it. But Boris Johnson is too friggin' arrogant to say that. It's, how dare you question this? How dare you say that the NHS Test and Trace is not working? It's a perfect system.
Mr. Speaker, we all want test, trace and isolate to succeed, and I've offered my support before, but the Prime Minister is ignoring a problem. If people are being told to go hundreds of miles, something is wrong. It's got a lot worse in the last week or two. Everybody in this House knows it because they've all had constituents telling them it. And the Prime Minister talks about capacity. The latest government figures were updated last night. They show that on average, 75,000 tests are not being used every day. If there's 75,000 that are not being used, why yesterday were people being told to go hundreds of miles for a test? Why yesterday were people being told there's no capacity?
I actually covered this in another video where hundreds of thousands of tests were being thrown away because they were not sufficiently, they weren't sufficient to do the testing with. Now, one of the companies who produced these tests is actually connected to someone senior in the government.
Mr. Speaker, the issue at the moment is that there has been a massive increase in the number of people who need or want tests, and particularly people who don't have symptoms. And we need, and I hope he agrees, we need to prioritise people such as NHS frontline.
Okay, so now he's saying that we need to prioritize. So a few months ago, and also a few weeks ago, Matt Hancock, Boris Johnson's health secretary, was saying that anyone who needs a test will get one. Boris Johnson also said anyone who needs a test will get one. There's sufficient testing for everyone. There are no capacity issues. We have extra capacity. Now he's saying that we don't have extra capacity, we need to prioritize. So you're actually going backwards, not forwards.
Staff are care workers who urgently need those tests. And as we massively increase the number of tests, it is those...
Once again, as we massively increase tests, we will be... Once again, the future, talking about the future, not actually talking about the present. What's the point in talking about the future when the future will change? Back in April, back in May, Matt Hancock was saying there will be an app. And then that failed, so you had to ask Apple and Google, Android and Google, Apple and Android to actually develop an app for you.
It is those groups who are getting priority. And I can just tell him that actually he's wrong in what he says about the failure of NHS test and trace. Let me tell him that of those contacts that supply details, 80% are reached, and 320,000 people have been persuaded to self-isolate and to stop the spread of the disease. That is the British people ignoring his attempt to undermine confidence in test and trace, ignoring his attempt to undermine confidence, and working together to get this disease defeated.
So once again, the attempt to use unity. Oh, everyone's working together. You know, how dare he insult the public when it's Boris Johnson's responsibility. If people are going to the website and it says there isn't capacity, Boris Johnson has to take responsibility for that. Or at least Matt Hancock has to take responsibility for that. Invoking, you know, how united we are as a people doesn't fix the problem. You know, if somebody calls up to do a test, says, I need to do a test, and the response is, we are a united people, that's not going to fix the person's problem.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I'm listening carefully to what the Prime Minister says. What's undermining confidence is families being told to go hundreds of miles and they can't get a test. That's undermining confidence. I just want it fixed. We don't need to have an argument. What's the problem? Accept there's a problem, tell us what the solution is, and we'll all muck in and try to make it better and tell our constituents. I've been listening. Is he saying there are too many people coming forward for tests? It's a capacity problem? Or not? People are trying to do the right thing. They want to go back to work. We want children back in schools. The Prime Minister is encouraging that, quite right too. We understand that, we support that. The government side of the bargain was to deliver an effective test, trace and isolate scheme. But 2 weeks into September, there's a glaring hole. Can the Prime Minister tell us, when did he first know about this particular problem of having to go hundreds of miles, or that tests were not going to be available? Last week it's arisen. When did he first know that that was a problem?
Mr. Speaker, it's obviously a function of the growing demand and the growing public confidence in NHS test and trace that we have to supply more and more tests, and that's what we've been doing. I think, Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether he's been listening. I've been trying to give the House the figures. Actually, thanks to the heroic efforts of NHS test and trace, we've gone up from 2,000 tests a day in March to 320,000.
Okay, but that's irrelevant, Boris. When did you know that there was a problem? That was the question. You know, maybe they should put it up on a big screen, the question. When did you know there was a problem? So that every time he looks up, he sees the question and he has to answer the frigging question.
A day today. And it is thanks to the efforts of those thousands of people who are listening keenly to his words for some support.
The question is, when did you know? He's not talking about them, he's talking about you. When did you know there was a problem?
Or some encouragement or some belief in what they're trying to do. It is thanks to them that people, on average, have to travel less than 10 miles, and it is thanks to them that 80% of the contacts that they identify, a coronavirus patient identifies, are reached and told to self-isolate. That's what we're trying to do, Mr. Speaker. It's hard work. It's hard work. It's a big job. And they're doing a fantastic job. And I really think what they would like to hear is some praise and encouragement and support from the Right Honourable Gentleman.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, why can't we just hear from the Prime Minister an honest answer? If he stood at dispatch box and said, I know something's gone wrong in the last couple of weeks, we've been getting hundreds of examples of people being sent all over the place or being told there's no test. I've looked into it. I've worked out what the problem is. Here's my plan. People might be reassured. But as ever, he pretends the problem isn't there. The infection rate is rising. This is the very point we need a functioning testing regime. But far from the world-beating system we were promised, the government can't even get the basics right. The government is lurching from crisis to crisis. It still lacks even basic incompetence. This is what's holding... It lacks competence. Yes, Prime Minister, it lacks competence. This is what's holding Britain back. So my final question is this. When is this problem with test, trace and isolate going to be fixed?
So let's just remember the question. When is this problem going to be fixed?
Mr. Speaker, I think he was on the money when he said that this government lacked in competence. And if I can just.
Yes, really, Boris. You've caught him. He made a slip. Fantastic. He's defeated.
Just say to him that we are working flat out to address all the issues confronting us today, including trying to get the infection rate down. And we are getting on, Mr. Speaker, with taking the tough...
Now, this is where Boris Johnson completely loses his mind. So the question was, when will this problem be fixed? When will this issue of test and trace be resolved? Because the public should know. The public are being asked to go to websites. When they go to these websites, they're told that there is no sufficient capacity. This is a serious problem. When is it going to be fixed? Or at least tell us your plan to fix it. Now listen to what Boris Johnson has to say.
Decisions, making the tough calls that will take this country forward. When it came to saying schools were safe, he was silent because he didn't want to offend his union bosses. And when left-wing anarchists, Mr. Speaker, tried to destroy the freedom of the press, he was silent because for some reason he didn't want to offend crusty left-wing anarchists.
So Boris Johnson has turned from answering a question about test and trace to insulting the leader of the opposition and connecting it to something about schools. Now he's moved on to the Extinction Rebellion protests.
And when it comes, by the way, to sticking up for our UK internal market,
now he's on to Brexit.
Mr. Speaker, and for delivering on the will of the British people, one of the most important
will of the people?
issues facing us today. He is totally silent on this bill that obsesses the rest of his backbenchers. He's totally silent. Great ox once again has stood on his tongue. He has nothing at all to say about that subject today because he doesn't want to offend the huge number of his backbenchers who want to overturn the verdict of the people and take us
democracy, Brexit.
back into the EU, which is of course what he wants to do himself. This government gets on and takes the tough decisions on behalf of the British people, delivering thousands of jobs through our
Build.
Kickstart scheme, a record-breaking investment in affordable housing, £12 billion affordable housing programme, and getting on with all our work, working with the British people and working with the Honourable Right Honourable Gentleman.
And unity.
If he would only do so to get coronavirus defeated.
I thought he was going to say to get Brexit done. So, get coronavirus defeated. Sorry I'm laughing here, guys, but this is just beyond the pale. This is Boris Johnson. He got Brexit done, now he's going to get coronavirus defeated. What a charlatan, what a crook, what a liar, what a buffoon. That's all I have to say on this, guys. Let me know in the comment section what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?